is made by grinding grains, nuts, seeds, or roots, and is used by most cultures around the world for both cooking and baking. There are many different sources from which flour is made. However, they can be separated by those which contain the proteins gluten and gliadin and those that do not. Traditionally, most Western flours are made from one or a combination of various wheat species or classes of wheat. These are generally classified into 6 main categories: hard red winter, hard red spring, soft red winter, soft white, hard white, and durum. Modern wheat was bred to produce higher farming yields, strong gluten, which equals better gas retention, and final volume of the products. However, in many instances, overall nutrition was reduced through this breeding when one compares them to many of the other specialty and ancient grain wheats. Here I've listed most of the flour types that contain gluten and their corresponding protein ranges. Some are mainstream flours, some are specialty, and the ones with the arrows are ancient wheat grains, which have been part of the human diet for over 10,000 years. As we look over at the gluten-containing flours listed here, many of them you'll be familiar with as mainstream milled flours derived from one or more of the 6 classes of modern wheat varieties. Others you may have heard about and may be used, while still others, especially with respect to the ancient wheat varieties, may be less so. Here I've listed a range of protein percentages where these flours generally fall. However, keep in mind that protein is not always an indication of the strength and general performance you can expect as with modern wheats. Let's talk more about this. Now, as I mentioned, ancient wheat grains have been around for over 10,000 years and are often used still in baking to provide higher nutrition, higher protein, unique flavors, and the sexy connotation that ancient grains provide when you're talking around the dinner table or you're putting onto a commercial ingredient package as a declaration. Keep in mind that ancient grains require more or less water. It's always good to check out the requirements that you need for each of these flours. They're different. Most often less mix time. They have a higher nutritional value. They produce less volume than modern wheat varieties and will often give you a dense crumb. Protein content of your flour is influenced by location, seasonal weather conditions, species of the wheat, soil conditions, precipitation, etc. Now, common wheat differs from ancient wheats due to the significantly different ratios of gluten-forming proteins, and the two being gliadin and glutenin. These two proteins work together to create this gluten matrix, which ultimately gives you the gas retention capabilities and the volume that you may or may not want out of strong bread flour, as an example. Now, as I mentioned previously, these wheats, the ancient grains, are higher in protein and overall nutrition than modern wheat varieties. However, because of these different ratios of gliadin and glutenin in them, they may actually be weaker and not perform as well in baking, ultimately providing lower volume and denser breads than one may expect when you look at the over total all protein that it's declaring. So keep that in mind. Now, I know for you people who've been baking for a while, this may seem redundant, but I think it's important to cover off a few and talk a little bit about the flour types. This type of flour is already pretty much a staple in most people's kitchen. It's very versatile. It's milled from a combination of soft and hard wheat and has a protein content somewhere between 9 and 12, depending on the brand. Because of this modern protein level, all-purpose flour can yield chewy cookies, flaky pie crust, works okay for breads. It can be used for thickener for sauces, etc., etc., etc. All-purpose truly is what it's really all about. Now, bread flour, the main difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour is the quantity of the protein. Bread flour is almost always made from hard wheat varieties and is available in both white and whole wheat. It has a higher protein content than all-purpose, usually somewhere between around 11 to 15%, depending on where you are in the world. It's called bread flour because most bread requires higher amounts of protein to produce lots of gluten, and so this flour is used mainly for bread and baked items where chewier texture is desired, like pizza crust and even bagels. Now, cake flour, and we're going to group cake flour and pastry flour together because they're reasonably similar. They're a very fine flour with a much lower protein content than bread or all-purpose, coming in at somewhere between 5 and 9%. This product is used where light, fluffy, non-chewy bakery items are the goal, cakes, pastries, that type of stuff. But keep in mind that pastry flour is known to have usually a little bit higher protein than cake flour, so it's always best to check your package. Whole wheat flour. Flour is milled from the entire kernel of the wheat and usually has a protein range of around 11 to 15%. The presence of bran reduces the gluten development, therefore items baked with whole wheat tend to be a little bit heavier and denser than those made from enriched flour. Bakers often add additional gluten to counteract this and also reduce mix times, as you'll see in my videos. Durum wheat is a variety of hard spring wheat, albeit different species from bread wheat. It's typically ground down to semolina for making pasta. Durum is a high-protein wheat descended from emmer. However, like many high-protein wheats and ancient grains, protein content does not always translate into gluten quality or quantity. Durum is no exception and therefore not generally used to make bread where volume and less dense crumb is a requirement. Now, 00 flour, lots of stuff, people automatically associate this with Italian baking. 00 flour most commonly refers to the grind size. That's really what it's all about. The flour is very finely ground, usually with a protein content that ranges somewhere between 8 and 12, kind of in and around the all-purpose flour area, but very finely ground. When using 00 flour for a specific purpose, be sure to check the type of flour. It is, as some are made from classic wheat varieties, and some can even be made of durum, which of course will impart a different type of characteristics and affect the baking performance in some products. Mostly used for pizza crust, some pasta, and also can be used in a pinch for breads, similar to all-purpose. Now, rye flour is generally categorized in three ways: light, medium, and dark. These flours are differentiated generally based on the amount of bran or germ in the flour. 100% whole grain rye is often referred to as pumpernickel and is available in various degrees of coarseness. White rye contains mostly endosperm and small traces of bran. Medium contains more bran and germ, and ultimately giving you a little bit more flavor and a little bit darker color. And dark rye contains more of the full grain, usually from 80 to 100%. Because baking is both science and an art, incorporating rye flour, rye meals, specialty flours, or ancient wheat varieties into your bakery products will require knowledge and experimentation. Many of these flours are blended with standard red or white wheat varieties to help provide more gluten for improved volume and less dense crumb. Guidelines for using these products can be found throughout the internet, so always good to do a little bit of research. And lastly, if you have a bag of almost any mainstream white flour, including cake flour, you can make almost anything out of it. I've seen people make bread out of cake flour. You can do it, as long as you understand the baking process and your ingredients. However, keep in mind that it's not good to just use a lower quality flour to bake a product if you want to actually have a good product. So if you want to make nice product with the desired characteristics, not just okay products that underperformed because you used a weak flour that you shouldn't really have used, then use the proper flour for the type of product that you want to make. Depending on where you are in the world, the climate, the growing season, etc., and of course the type of wheat variety, all play a factor in the quality and performance of your flour. As I mentioned, flour protein can be misleading as it pertains to gluten strength and overall volume expectations for your product. Modern wheats have been genetically modified and crossbred to optimize a balance of nutrition with baking performance, and that's one of the reasons the big 6 classes of wheat make up the majority of wheat production around the world. For successful baking, it is important that you do a little research regarding your flour type, especially when you're playing with flours with high nutrition or high protein but poor gluten performance, like rye or many of the ancient wheat species. Be clear about the type of product you're planning to bake, the finished characteristics that you want, and the flour's ability to meet those expectations. Because we know high protein does not always mean strong flour, be sensitive to varying hydration levels and mix times when using specialty and off-standard flours or coarse milled wheat grains. As a simple example, whole wheat flour or wholemeal flour is different around the world and comes in many variants such as stone ground, coarse, whole wheat, fine milled, etc. Do not rely on a YouTube video to ensure your product works as it should. Know your flour.
Thank you for watching the video. If you liked what you saw, please give me a like and a subscribe. It really helps me out as I'm getting this channel going here. And be sure to check out some of the other videos that I have sitting right over here. We'll see you next time. No BS Baking.